Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to give you an introduction to Photoshop. I've been using Photoshop for more than 15 years, and I'm always surprised at the number of people who don't know basic things in Photoshop, or have been using it for many years and still don't know what certain blending modes are, or where to find certain tools, or what certain tools are even for. So in this lesson, I've done a full overview of Photoshop, the workspace, the tools, the layer stack, and everything that you need to know in order to get started in Photoshop. Now, this is the first lesson in my 17+ hour course on Photoshop, which is coming out soon. Go ahead, add your email address into the waiting list, and I'll let you know once that's out. It's going to cover all manner of projects, which are really fun and kind of teach you all the different cool techniques, methods, and procedures that you can use in Photoshop to create very cool composites and effects. So if you want to follow along with this, I have included a link in the or a link in the description of the video with all the assets. Go ahead, download those, and then let's dive into Photoshop.
Okay, so if you first open Photoshop, you'll probably see something like this. This is the home screen. If you click on this icon here, this is the software interface. You can click back on this home icon to bring you back to this opening screen. So let's go to File, Open, and in the Assets, we're going to open this Layer Sample PSD. So let's click on that, and then we can go down here to open. You can also just double click on the file. So here we have our file. First thing I want to do is just familiarize you with the workspace for Photoshop. So before we do anything else, let's go up to Window here, go down to Workspace, and we're going to go on to Essential. And then let's go back to Workspace and let's hit Reset Essentials. That way I know that your screen matches what I'm seeing. Okay, so first off, let's talk about the interface for Photoshop. At the very top here, we have the menu. And this is where you're going to access all the various tools, applications, effects, filters that you can do in Photoshop. Next, we have our tools. These usually run along the left side here. You can also click on these double arrows to make it 2 columns, or you can click on it again and make it 1 column. Here you have your canvas, and this is where your image or images are going to be that you're working on. And then up along here, you have your tool options. So depending on what tool you have selected, you'll notice that the options in this bar change. That's because they are all dependent on what tool you have selected. Then on the right here, we have a few tools. This allows you to share your work. You can search Photoshop. You can change your workspace up here, and then you have some additional tools there. Next, we have our palettes, and our palettes are basically little options or tools that you're going to use with your main image. So here you can see your color picker, swatches, gradients, patterns. These are all adjustable, and then here you have properties, layers, channels, paths, and so forth. Before we dive into all the individual tools, let's go ahead and set up our workspace how we want it. So in order to change things in your workspace, what you're going to do is select the tab, which is this part here with the name on it, and you can click and drag that around to move the location of it. So, and you can also see in this bar here, you kind of have 2 views, or I should say 3 views for each of your panels. So your panel can exist like this, where you have the full panel. It can also exist as a small icon like this, and then you click it to bring it out. And then finally, it can exist as a freestanding window. So those are the three states. You've got a freestanding window, a docked window, or a docked icon. Now, the only layers that I want, or sorry, the only panels that I want constantly showing are my layers panel. That's the most important. And then I also want to always see my histogram. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all these panels and just put them in this side view here. So we have their icon. They're available to us when we need them, but they're not always showing and taking up real estate in our view that we'd rather use for things that we're always going to use. So let's go ahead and start moving all these into this column here. I'm doing that just by grabbing the name of the tab there and then dragging that. And you'll notice when I do it, a little blue icon or highlight appears. That's telling you that you can drop it in that zone. So I'm going to leave color up here as well. And then all your panels live here in your window top menu item. So if I go down here to histogram, you'll see I now have my histogram. It exists as an icon that I can either collapse or uncollapse, but I want it to always exist as an open tab. So I'm going to take my tab right here, histogram, and just drag that over here. You'll notice the big blue highlight hover appears. So I'm going to just drop that there. Now I have my histogram here where I want it. I'm going to leave layers, channels, and paths. So in terms of your basic setup, this is what you want. You want your tools on your left, your canvas area in the middle, and then your layers and histogram here on the right. Generally, when you're working in Photoshop, this is how you want it set up. So let's go up here under Workspace and then say New Workspace. And this will save how we've set up our workspace. So I'm going to type this Nucly default, and we'll include the menus and the toolbar. Now we're going to dive into keyboard shortcuts a bit later, so I'm going to leave this off for now. Let's hit save. Now, if I go to Workspace and I select one of these other ones, you'll notice all my panels changed here. But if I go to Workspace, Nucly default, we've now come back to our original working space. And that is the basics of the Photoshop workspace and how to move your panels around. All right, now that we're familiar with the basic workspace of Photoshop, let's dive a little deeper into our top menu. And obviously you can, on your own, look at what is in this top menu, but I want to cover kind of broad strokes. So if you have something in mind, you know generally where to go and look for it. So for starters, you have Photoshop, and this is where you're going to go to your preferences or where you're going to quit the program. Next, you have File. This is for setting up a new file, opening a file, basically working with the program or documents at a document level. Next, you have Edit. This is where you have Copy, Paste. This is also where you have Fill, Stroke, Puppet Warp, quite a few of the distortion tools, such as Free Transform, Puppet Warp, Perspective Warp. You also have the Sky Replacement tool in here. You can define brushes and so forth, as well as adjust your color settings and even adjust your keyboard menus and toolbar. Next, you have Image, and this is where you're going to make changes to your image. Here's where you have all the adjustments, so all your color adjustments. You also have the image size, the canvas size, rotation, crop, and so forth. Next, you have Layer, and this is where you're going to create new layers, adjust layers, and so forth. We're going to dive into the Layers panel in a next lesson. So for now, just understand that this is where you work with layers. Next, you have Type, and this is for your Type tool. In Photoshop, this gives you a lot of options for your fonts and your typography. Next, you have tools for helping you make selections. So here you can select all, you can also select the color range, focus area, subject, and so forth. Next, you have filters. So these are all the effects that you can apply to your image or to your layer. At the top here, you have ones that will bring you into their own dialogue. And then here you have all the basic standard effects that you can apply to your image. Next, you have 3D. Now, in this course, we are not going to really go into any of the 3D tools of Photoshop. 3D is not something that Adobe is going to continue pursuing in Photoshop because they have other programs now where they are developing their 3D tools. So I think in the future, we're probably going to see this becoming less and less relevant. And to be honest, it never was that relevant in Photoshop. So we're going to skip this altogether. Next, we have View. And this is where you can turn on your guides, your grids, and you can also change your zoom. You can do proofing of colors and so forth. Next, you have plugins, and this is where you manage plugins. And finally, you have Window, and this is where you can set up your workspace, as we already did. You can also arrange, if you have more than one document open, you can arrange how they show in your canvas area. You can also from here, open or close any of your panels. So window or palettes or panels are all these things, and all those are represented here. Two other things. Oh, and then finally we have help. This is where you're going to go for any Photoshop help. Now, there's a few things I want you to notice about the top menu that are just going to help you learn Photoshop faster. So the first one is anytime there's 3 dots after a menu item, that means that by selecting that menu item, you're going to open a dialog box. So for example, place embedded, you can see it has 3 dots. If I click on that, it's going to open a dialog. If I go to here and I go to version history, you see that that does not have 3 dots. When I click on that, it's just opening this dialog here, or sorry, this panel. It's not actually opening a new dialog. Same with close. If I close this, it's not going to open a dialog. So just realize if there's 3 dots after a menu item, that means it has a dialog box associated with it. And if it does not, that means there is no dialog box that's going to open. It's going to, whatever action it's taking, it's going to do it directly in the software. Okay, next, let's talk about shortcuts. And you'll notice as we move along the menu here, any item that has a shortcut, the shortcut is displayed on the right here. Now, this is very important as you're working with Photoshop because the more shortcuts you know, the less you have to move your mouse around, the faster you're going to be working. So here, if we go to adjustments, you'll notice that levels has Command L, or if you're working on a PC, that's going to be Command or Control L instead of Command L. Curves is Command M, hue saturation is Command U. So generally, as you're working in Photoshop, and we'll do this as we work on the lessons, if you find yourself going to one of these menu items, as you go to that menu item, look at what the shortcut is and try to do the shortcut instead of using the menu item. Okay, and then the last thing I want to show you is on help. If you don't know where a menu item is, if you start typing it in help here, so let's say we wanted to do a new layer mask, we're going to type in new layer mask or new layer, or maybe we type in layer mask. And you'll notice that as we type these things, it shows you where they are in your menu. So that's a very helpful way to find things. If you don't know where they are in the large menu, just put it in here. So, I can start typing in Puppet Warp. If I didn't know where that was, go down to here and it's going to show me where in the menu that item is. So those are some tips, tricks for working with the top menu. It also gives you a general idea of what's in that top menu. All right, the next thing I want to quickly show you is the layers palette. Now the layers palette is here. And if you don't see your layers palette, you can go up to here and click on layers. And the layers palette shows you all of the individual layers or elements that make up your final image. And you can turn these on or off by clicking on the eyeball. You'll notice that the purple butterfly here disappears when I turn it off, a light blue butterfly, green butterfly, and so forth. And you'll notice that this background has a little lock icon. The background is basically the very back of your image, and that has some significance in certain workflows in Photoshop, but just know that any image that you open, even if it has no layers whatsoever, will always have this background. Okay, next we have adjustment layers. These are layers which adjust your image, and they sit in your layer stack, and depending on where they are in the layer stack is what they're going to affect. So generally the layer stack kind of works from bottom up. So whatever's at the bottom of the layer stack will show first, and then whatever sits on top of it will sit on top of it. So here you can see three. We've got this ball, we've got this ball, and we've got our contrast curve. Well, if I move the contrast curve up, you can see it just affected this. If I move it above that, it's now affecting this. So depending on where objects are in your layer stack will determine where they sit visually, whether they're on top or below another object. So if I select my shape layer here, make sure I'm on the Move tool, which is this very top tool, and make sure you have Auto Select turned off for now. We'll cover that in the next lesson, but for now, just make sure this Auto Selects is turned off. Make sure you have your Move tool selected and your shape layer selected, which you can tell by this little highlight here. Now, if I move this over, you can see that this is sitting on top of this ball, but if I take shape layer 1 and move it up, you can see that this ball is sitting on top. So in your layer stack, whatever is at the bottom here is also going to be at the bottom of your image. Whatever is at the top is going to sit on top. So let's turn on layers. Let's turn on the phonograph, and you can see because the phonograph is above layers, it's sitting on top. Let's try to move these back to where they were before. Something like that. Okay, and then we've got the grass, and you can see that's sitting in the foreground. You'll notice here with these layers, let's go ahead and turn everything off but the background. And let's turn this off too. So here you can see the phonograph, and then here you can see some grass. And you can see how having these three layers makes this look a little more realistic, because rather than just sitting on top of this ground, we have some grass that's kind of covering up where it's sitting and making this look a little more real. And that's the power of layers, and really the power of Photoshop is being able to layer different visual elements on top of each other. All right, so here you can see this is a folder. If I click on this little drop down here, you can see the two layers that are in that folder. Being able to put certain layers into a folder gives you a lot more control. Here I've got one layer that makes the bird. I can now move this layer group around and it'll move my whole bird, as opposed to this, if I move just the wing, well, now it's, separated from the bird there. So I'm going to undo that with Command Z. So just use Command Z on your keyboard. Okay, so let's select our bird, move him back here. And then we've got our blue butterfly, our green butterfly, our light blue butterfly, and our purple butterfly. Now you'll notice these have an additional icon. That means they are linked. So when I select one of these, it's actually going to move all the ones that are linked to it. So let's grab this blue butterfly here. And if I move it, you'll notice all the butterflies are moving at the same time. And that's because these layers are linked together. And if we look down here at our little tools, you'll notice that I have this one for the link. And now I've unlinked it. If I move my blue butterfly, it's not moving the others. Because these three are still linked, if I move them, they still move together as a group. So that's one way of grouping layers together. Back in the old days of Photoshop, linking was the only way to group layers. They've since added two other ways to group layers. The first being a folder or a group of layers, and the other being a smart object, which we'll cover here in just a sec. Okay, so back to linking. If you want to link, just select more than one layer at a time, which you're going to do by holding down Shift, or by holding down Command, you can individually select layers. But if you want to just select all of them, just hold Shift, and whatever between, all the layers between will select. If you hold Command, the layers between will not select. Okay, so let's do Shift, select all these three, and then click on the link icon. Now those are no longer linked. If we wanted to link them again, I would select multiple layers and then click on the link icon. Okay, let's do Command Z, undo that. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you here is what a smart object is. And you'll notice that a smart object is a layer that has this little icon next to it. What that means is if I double click on this layer, it'll open up a new document. Oops. So here you can see this butterfly is in its blue butterfly.psb. This is a smart object. If I were to change something in here, so let's go ahead and do edit, free transform, and then I'm going to do right mouse click and flip horizontal. And then I'm going to click on this check mark, and then I'm going to close this by clicking on this little X. We're going to File, Close. I'm going to hit Save. And now you'll notice that this butterfly and this butterfly are facing in a different direction. If I do Command Z, you can see that's undone it. I'm going to redo it, redo, which is Shift Command Z. So let's do Shift Command Z. You can see now it's done it, undone it. So that's what a smart object is. It's a layer or a group of layers that you can manipulate by double clicking. And then when you close it, it'll update in your parent file. So the advantage of this is you can make duplicate copies of something and change their scale, add effects to them and so forth, but they'll still be a child of your original parent object. So in this case, I have my blue butterfly and I've got the green butterfly, which is a copy of that same smart object. So in my green butterfly, I have a filter that's making it more green. And in my blue butterfly, I have no filter. So if I go into my blue butterfly here, and let's go to my brush tool. And I'm going to right mouse click, select this hard round brush and make the size 2 pixels. I want to make sure my foreground color is black. And then if I just paint 2 antennae on here, and then close this, you'll notice that the antennae were added both to this butterfly and to this butterfly. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Okay, so that's what a smart object is. Next thing is a type layer. You can see that here. A type layer is basically a layer that's made of type. And unlike other layers, you can go in with your type tool and change what this says. Okay, and then we have a shape layer, and a shape layer is a vector shape that then is filled in with some kind of color. And if I go to my properties, which is this icon here, or if you go to Window, Properties, you'll see under my appearance, I've got a fill and a stroke for this shape layer that I can control here. And then we have an adjustment layer, and an adjustment layer controls the color or contrast or exposure or what have you of all the layers below it. So here, if I put this at the very top, you see it's adjusting the contrast for everything. If I put it down here, it's just adjusting the contrast of my background because that's the only layer that's beneath it. Okay, so that's the basics of the layer panel. Here you have the ability to filter the type of layers, so you can search by name, by effect, what have you. Here you can filter out to just the pixel layers, meaning a standard Photoshop layer. Here you have adjustment layers, so this will just show you adjustment layers, just show you type layers, just show you shape layers, and just show you smart objects. So that's what those are. And then here you have blending modes, which we'll cover in the next lesson. And you can adjust the opacity and the fill, which we'll also cover in a separate lesson. Generally, opacity is, well, the amount of transparent your object is. So if we look at the bird and adjust the opacity, you can see if I start moving it towards 0, it's going to become more and more transparent. Fill does a very similar thing, although when you have layer effects, this fill comes into play. We're going to cover that in a separate lesson. Okay, and then down here we have linking, which we covered. We have a layer effects, and if we go to this text layer here, you can see this FX icon. That means that this has a layer effects on it. In this case, it's adding a drop shadow. If I turn the eyeball here on or off, you can see that that is turning on and off that drop shadow. Now, if I click here, you can see all the types of effects that you can apply. You can also access blending options here, which we'll cover. That's just another way to manipulate layers and the way they blend. Okay, then we have layer masks. And the layer mask allows you to add a second image on top of a layer that controls the transparency of that layer. So basically, it's a way to delete things from your layer without actually deleting them. We're going to cover the usefulness and how to use masks in other lessons, so we'll just leave it at that. Next, we have adjustment layers. This one here is a curves layer, so if I double click it, you can see that that's adding a curve to my image, but you have all sorts of other adjustments that you can make, and these act as a layer, and they basically adjust everything that's underneath that layer as if it were one image. Okay, and then here you have groups. So this allows you to add a group, and Photoshop allows you to do 10 layers of subgroup. So I can do bird, and then I can put this into a group like this, and then this I could put into another group like this. So basically Photoshop allows you to do a lot of sub-level of grouping. Obviously for a file like this, it's not necessary, but for example, if you were doing a book cover and it had multiple languages, you might have a group for your titles and then a group for each language. There's a lot of ways that you can use this, and there's also even workflow ways that you can use grouping for visual effects, which we'll cover in some later lessons. All right, and then this allows you to create a new layer. So if I click on that, you can see I've added a blank layer. Also, you can copy layers. So look at this grass layer here. If I drag this down to the new layer icon, it'll make a copy of my grass layer. Okay, so that is that. And then finally, you have the trash icon. This allows you to throw layers away. So let's go ahead and make a copy of my grass. I can go here and just drag it to the trash can. That's going to throw it away. Or I can just click on the trash icon layer and it's going to throw that layer away. Whatever layer I have selected will be thrown away. Okay, so that's all the tools down here. Next, you do have this contextual menu for the layers palette. This allows you to access functions and tools particular to your layers palette. Again, we're going to dive into this as we actually start working in Photoshop, but just realize that it does exist there. Also allows you down here under panel options to change the size of your thumbnails if you want that. You can also show what the thumbnail contains. So, for example, if we look at this bird and the wing, right now the thumbnail contents is the entire document. But if we change this to layer bounds, you're going to see that the layer icons represent just what is in that layer as opposed to representing the full canvas. I'm going to go to my panel options here, change this back to entire document. That's my preferred method, and we'll hit OK. Okay, and then finally, we do have some right mouse options as well. So on a layer, if you right mouse click, you're going to see some of those same options as well as some new ones. You can actually color label layers. So if you want to have color labels on your layers, you can add them here. And you also have some specific options that are layers or specific to a layer, such as blending options and convert to smart object. Okay, so that pretty much covers everything in your layers palette. The one other thing you will notice is that if you have a smart object, it'll have this little icon, and filters that you add to your smart object will be added as smart filters. You're going to see this little icon added here. If I throw away these smart filters, that will disappear. And if I do any filter here, or even an adjustment layer, so whether it's a filter here or an adjustment layer here, it's going to add this little icon and it'll add a smart filter with a mask built in for that smart filter. So that's the basics of the layers palette. The next thing we'll cover briefly is blending modes. All right, let's go ahead and close this file. I'm going to go to File, Close. We don't need any of the changes, so let's say don't save. Let's go to File, Open. I'm going to open this Blend Sample PSD. Okay, let's go to the sample layer here, turn that on. And what I want to discuss now is these blending modes. So blending is basically how these pixels are going to blend with the layer below it. Now, the normal blending mode, which is the default, has basically no blending. This just sits on top of the other layer. You can't see any of the layer through it. Now, you can adjust the opacity, which will change how transparent that layer is, meaning how much of the layer below it I can see through. And you can do that with all the blending modes. Now, the next blending mode is dissolve. And this one really only affects transparency. So here where there's no transparency, there's no change. But here you can see where there is transparency, it's basically using a dot pattern in place of transparency. And if I start to take the opacity of this down, you can see a little bit more how that's actually working. It's using a dot pattern anywhere where there's some kind of transparency. Okay, next we have darken. And what darken does is any pixels that are darker will be replaced with the foreground layer. anything that's lighter, the background layer will show through. So you can see here where it's starting to get darker than the background, the layer here is starting to show. All right, next we have multiply. Now multiply is one of the most important blend modes along with screen and overlay. And what multiply does is it basically gets rid of anything that's white. You can almost imagine it as whatever this layer is, whatever your top layer is, imagine it printing on your background directly. So imagine taking this image as you would see it on a white piece of paper, so something like this, and this is now going to print on top of your background. So this is what it would look like, because anything that's white, well, that's simply not printing. Okay, next you have color burn, which is similar to multiply, but it's burning the color, so it's doing like a strong contrast there. That's similar to linear burn as well as darken color. All these are variants on the basic theme of multiply. So between this thin line here and this thin line, all these are going to be working to make your image below darker based on the top layer. Okay, next we have lighten, and that's basically the same as darken, except for obviously it's making it lighter. So anything that's lighter than the background will show, anything that's darker than the background will disappear. All right, then we have screen. And this, again, is one of those really important blending modes that you're going to be using a lot of. And what screen does is anything that's black will disappear. And then as it gradates toward a lighter color, those lighter colors are going to show. So here you can see normal and screen. And you can see everything that's dark or black is disappearing with the background showing through instead. Now, everything in this area, the lighten, screen, color dodge, and linear color, all do a very similar thing in terms of turning the area lightened. So with these blending modes, black disappears. With these blending modes, white disappears. Okay, next we have overlay. And overlay works to make anything that is in your top layer, if it's lighter than your background, it's going to make your background lighter. And if it's darker than your background, it's going to make your background darker. So think of this as contrast, meaning it's going to make things lighter and darker. And that applies to all these in between here. So soft light, hard light, all these are basically doing a variation of overlay. All these are doing a variation of screen. All these are doing a variation of multiply. Now with overlay, anything that's gray, meaning neutral gray, will not affect your background. So if we take this neutral gray, I'm going to put it here, and I put this on overlay, you're going to see that it has no visual difference between the foreground and the background. Now it has to be a perfect neutral gray, meaning exactly 50% luminosity. But just realize if you have gray and you want that to disappear, you're going to use one of these blending modes. If you have white and you want it to disappear, you're going to use one of the multiply blending modes. And if you have something black you want disappeared, you're going to use one of these lighten or screen blending modes. Okay, next we have the process blending modes. So these all create some kind of process. So this is difference, it creates a negative effect. Same with exclusion, subtract, and divide also create almost an inverse effect of screen and multiply. Okay, and then we have hue, which basically changes the hue, meaning the color. The saturation changes how saturated it is. Color changes just the color. And then luminosity changes just the brightness and darkness without changing the color. And to highlight, again, the most important ones are going to be normal, multiply, screen, and overlay. Those are the ones that you're going to be using 90% of the time. So let's look at some examples of how you would use these in a real scenario. Here we have a vignette layer. If I put this on normal, you can see it's just covering up my image. But if I put this on multiply, it's going to create a nice vignette. If I put this on screen, it's going to create a bright kind of fog coming from there. And if I put this on overlay, it's going to create contrast in my image, with this part of the image being made lighter and this part here being made darker. Now, generally for something like this, you probably want to do something not quite that strong. For this, you might use soft light. Here you can see a before and after. The soft light is kind of giving me a nice depth from this light coming out going this way. Okay, next, let's look at an example of multiply where we would use that. Here you can see an image, but I just want the black part. So if I put this on multiply, I now just have the black part of this image showing, and the white is going to transparent. All right, let's turn on this layer here. This is a flare, and I have this lined up with the sun, but I don't want any of this black showing. I just want to use the flare. Well, I can use screen, and here you can see I've now added that bright light there. But because it's on screen, it's not affecting any of the rest of the image. So there you can see how we can use some blending modes, soft light, multiply, and screen on top of our image to create some cool effects. Now these blending modes all have a shortcut. So in order to change the blending mode of a layer, you have to be on the Move tool, which is this top tool here. You have to have the layer selected, and then you're going to use Shift and Option on a Mac or Shift and Alt on a PC, and then you're going to use a single letter shortcut. So most of the single letters are pretty obvious, like normal is going to be N, dissolve is going to be D, or sorry, darken is going to be D, multiply is M, I believe color burn is B, screen is S, overlay is O, soft light is F, and those are the most important ones. So those are the ones that I want you to learn. So Shift Option N for normal, Shift Option M for multiply, Shift Option S for screen, Shift Option O for overlay, Shift Option F for soft light. Okay, so those are the blending modes, and you're going to see the blending modes both on your layers palette here. Also, if you're using some of the brush or gradient tools, you're going to see that you also have the option of adding a blending mode to your brush. But that is the basics of blending modes. The next thing we're going to do is kind of look at all of our tools. And for that, I want to open our earlier file. So let's go ahead and close this. Go back to File, Open, and let's open our layer sample file. Okay, so here I want to cover the basics of the various tools. So first, let's go into our layers here, and I'm going to select the phonograph layer. And let's go to our very first tool, which is the Move tool. Now the Move tool allows you to move objects around. So you can just click and drag to move an object around. And with this tool, I can also transform objects. So I can either rotate them or scale them. Now you'll notice there's not really a way for me to scale or rotate. There's no scale or rotate tool. And that's where this Show Transform controls comes in. Or you can do Edit, Free Transform. And if you don't have your transform controls on, in order to show them, you're going to have to do Command T. So if I do Command T on my keyboard, you can see I now have my transform controls. And this is basically a bounding box that exists around my layer. If I grab one of these little boxes on the corner, I can scale my object up or down. I can if I hover a little bit away from these objects, you'll see my cursor changes. That allows me to rotate. And I can also skew or even flip objects around, but we're going to cover that in later lessons. Just know if you want to transform an object, meaning change the rotation or scale of it, you're going to do Edit, Free Transform. Now in here, once you've made your changes, you can hit the checkbox or hit Enter on your keyboard or just double click anywhere. Now I don't want to make these changes, so I'm going to click on this or hit Escape on my keyboard. Okay, so again, if you want to always see these transform boxes, you can turn that on. I find that distracting to anytime I select a layer to have a transform box around it. So I just keep this turned off. And if I want to make a change to my rotation or the scale of my object, I just do Command T to bring up my transform. All right, let's hit Escape again. Next thing is this auto select here. This may be on by default. I'm not totally sure what the default is, but what this allows you to do is click in your canvas here, and you'll notice that it's selected the layer that I click on. So if I want to select the phonograph, I click on the phonograph. If I want to select the bird, I click on the bird. If I want to click on this butterfly, I click on the butterfly. Now, you can change the auto select from layer to group. So let's say you have a file with a lot of groups and you want to select the group of the bird here rather than the wing. Well, now you just have this on group. Now when I select this, it's selecting the entire group, not just the wings or the body. I'm going to put this back on layer. Now my preferred way of working with Photoshop is to keep this turned off. As you're working in Photoshop, if you hold down Command, you'll notice that this checkbox turned on. So I can hold down Command, select the object that I want, let go of Command, and now I'm not restricted to having to click exactly on the object. If I click here on a different object and start dragging, it's not going to change my selection. It's just going to move the layer that I have selected. So that's my preferred method, is just leave this off, and then when you need it, hold down Command. And you'll start to notice as we go through all of our tools that holding down various keys on your keyboard changes the behavior of your tool. So as I just showed you there, if I hold down Command, I've changed my tool to select. If I hold down Option, you'll notice my cursor changes. And what that's going to do is if I drag or move a layer around, it's actually going to make a duplicate or a copy of that layer. You can see it just made a duplicate there. And if I hold down Shift, it's going to restrain my motion so that I can only do either 90 degrees up and down or side to side. And then let's undo that. And let's go ahead, undo this. Okay, there you go. Okay, so that's the Move tool. And next you have the Artboard tool. We're not going to go into artboards because we really don't need it for this course. Artboard is basically Photoshop's implementation of duplicate pages, meaning having more than one page in a document. Kind of defeats the purpose of Photoshop in my opinion. So I don't use artboards. I just use Photoshop as a single canvas. All right, next we have the marquee selection tools. This allows you to make selections by clicking and dragging. And the significance of selections is that it allows you to work on a specific part of your image or your layer without affecting everything or anything that's outside of that selection. And the more we work with Photoshop, you'll see the importance of selections and the amount of power that selections gives you to manipulate your images. Okay, next we have the lasso tool. This allows you to do freehand selections. So like that. Next, we have all the tools for object selection and quick selection. So object selection allows you to circle a specific area, and then Photoshop will determine what you're trying to select based on that. Quick select lets you paint over an area and select it. And then magic wand allows you to click and it'll select, based on where you clicked, it'll select all the pixels that are similar to whatever you clicked. So if I'm on layer and I click on the R here, it's going to select all the pixels that are white. And you can control here the tolerance for that and also whether you want it to be contiguous or not. So contiguous means if there's a separation here, you can see this is separated by space on either side, so it's not going to select any of the other white pixels. If I turn this on and click here, it's going to select all the white pixels regardless of whether they're touching or not, and then whether they're selecting all layers or just the layer you have selected here. So if I turn on all layers and then click on something white, it's going to select all the white pixels across the whole image. Okay, so that's those. Next, you have the crop tool. This allows you to crop your image. We're going to obviously cover that in other tutorials, but that's what the tool is for. Next, you have the frame tool. The frame tool allows you to basically build a frame that you can then drop images into. We're not going to be using a lot of that. Next, you have the eyedropper. This allows you to select colors. And you can see here your little foreground and background color. We're going to cover that a little bit later, but as I click here, you'll see that the color in here is changing. And here you can determine whether you're selecting a point sample, 3 pixel by 3 pixel average, and whether you're selecting the current layer, current and below, all layers, no adjustments, and so forth. All right, next you have your healing tools. These all work to correct spots or damage on your images. We'll cover those in a separate lesson. Next, you have the brush tools, and the brush tools basically allow you to paint. So if I right mouse click, I can select the brush that I want and then start painting in my layer. Let's go ahead and undo that. And you also have the pencil tool, which is the same as the brush tool, but without any feathering. And you've got the color replacement tool, mixer brush. We'll cover all those in detail. Just realize these are all your brushing tools. Next, you have the stamp tool. This allows you to take information from one part of your image, like here, hold down Option, click on it, and then paint that part of the image somewhere else. So basically allows you to make a copy of it using a brush. Let's go ahead and undo that. Next, you have the art history brush. This allows you to paint to an earlier state in your history. We'll cover that in a specific tutorial. Next, you have the eraser tool. This allows you to erase parts of your image. Generally, you're not going to be using the eraser tool because the better way to erase parts of your image is using masks, which we're going to cover a bit later. All right, next you have the gradient. This allows you to make a gradient across your whole image. So let's go ahead, make a new layer. We'll call this gradient. And if I click here, drag and let go, it's going to make a gradient that goes from blue to transparent. Now up here in my tool options, you can see I have options for different types of gradients. So this will go from my foreground color to my background color. This one will go to my foreground color to transparent. And this one will go from black to white. Those are your basics. And then you have a whole bunch of different gradients there. Here you can control what type of gradient. So this you can see is a linear gradient. And if we delete this, so let's do select all and then hit delete. That'll just delete all the pixels there. And then we can go select, deselect. And if you have everything selected, it's the equivalent to having your layer selected. So there aren't a lot of scenarios where you're going to need to select all unless you're deleting everything in your layer. And then Command D is a shortcut for deselect. That'll drop whatever live selection you have. So remember that Command D is deselect. Okay, so radial gradient goes out from the center. I'm going to do Command Z. This is a gradient that goes in a circle like this. And then this is a gradient that goes out from the middle to either side. And then this is kind of like a diamond-shaped gradient. So those are the different types of gradients, and we have blending modes and opacity. You can also reverse, have transparency, and so forth. So those are your gradients. Next, you have the blur, sharpen, and smudge tool. These allow you to blur or sharpen specific parts of your image. Then we have dodge and burn. These allow you to make parts of your image lighter or darker. So we select our phonograph again and paint with this. You can see it's making parts of our image lighter. And then if I use burn, it's going to make parts of our image darker. Let's go ahead and undo all that. Now here you can undo here. That'll allow you to undo just stepping backwards. You can also go here in your history. So if we go to Windows and click on History, you can see we have a running record of every command we've done since we opened the file. And we can go all the way back in our history to whatever point we want from where we are now. Now this is limited to a certain amount. I don't know exactly how much it is. I believe in preferences you can set it, but just realize you have this running record of commands. You can always step backwards in it all the way right back to where the file was opened. Okay, so that's the dodge burn. Next, we have pen tools. So this allows you to create a vector shape or a vector path, which you can then use in your image. All right, next we have the type tool. This allows you to basically add type into Photoshop, and with it you can change fonts. Basically all the things that you have in any kind of type-based program, you do have available here in Photoshop. All right, next we have the path selection tool. This allows you to select paths. So in this case here we have a path. And with this, I can also select anchor points and so forth. It's basically the move tool, but for paths. Next, you have the path shapes. So these are all vector paths or vector shapes. You can change here whether they're path, pixels, or a shape, but they all basically are vector shapes that you can then add to your file. Next, we have the hand tool, and this allows you, so if we're zoomed in here, allows you to move your canvas around without actually moving any objects. You're just moving what part of the image you're looking at inside your canvas. And then your zoom tool, which allows you to zoom in or zoom out. Now this is the scrubby zoom. Without that, you have to click to zoom in, hold down Option, and click to zoom out. With scrubby zoom turned on, you can click, drag right to zoom in, drag left to zoom out. And generally that's my preferred behavior, so I'm going to leave this scrubby zoom turned on. Okay, finally we have this edit toolbar. This allows us to edit the toolbar, which we're going to do at the end of this lesson, just to get rid of all the tools that we don't usually use. All right, next we have these few things down here. So this is our foreground and our background color. Well, let's go on to a brush tool. Let's add a layer at the very top here. Actually, we have one. So with my foreground color, if I paint, you'll notice that that is painting in blue. And if I click here to my background color and make this red, with these two arrows here, I can switch between my foreground and my background. So I can be painting red, switch to my second color, paint some blue. And as we work in Photoshop, you'll see the value of having two colors here. Also having two colors, if you go to your gradient tool, you'll notice that your basic gradient here, foreground to background, inherits those colors. So there's quite a few tools in Photoshop that use both colors, but just realize that whatever color is on top is the one that you're going to brush with. And by clicking this little icon here, you can switch between your foreground and background. There are also shortcuts for this, which is X on your keyboard. So with X, you can switch between your foreground color, X again, background color. Okay, then we have this little icon here, which is default. And what this does is it defaults both of these colors back to black and white. So if I want to switch both of these colors to black and white, I'm going to click on this little icon here. You can see they're now black, hit X, and white. And let's go ahead and change both of our foreground colors. Now, I mentioned earlier that you can switch your foreground color with the eyedropper. And I also mentioned that all these tools have different behaviors if you hold down some of the function keys like Shift, Control, Option, Command. In this case, with the brush, if I hold down Option, it's going to temporarily give me the eyedropper. So here I can select blue, hit X, select this red. Now I've changed my foreground and background color back to blue and red. And I didn't have to go here and change my tool. All I had to do was hold down Option. So red, X, blue. And then to default my colors, I'm going to hit D on the keyboard. Now I'm back to black, X, and white. Okay, so that's all these. Next we have the mask. This is actually Quick Mask. And what Quick Mask does is it puts you in a quick mask mode. And now when I'm painting, I'm not actually painting pixels. What I'm doing is I'm painting a mask. And if I hit Q again, you can see it's turned that information into a selection. Now we're going to deep dive into Quick Mask later. So for now, all you need to know is that the Quick Mask allows you to paint a mask directly in your image. And then when you go out of it, it turns it into a selection. All right, let's do Command D to drop that selection. I'm also going to throw away this layer 1. Okay, and then finally we have the view modes, and you'll notice that the shortcut for the view modes is F. So let's go ahead, hit F on our keyboard. This view mode gets rid of the window and also makes your canvas free floating. This is kind of my preferred way of working. Next, you have professional mode, and this gets rid of everything except for your working canvas. So if you're really good with Photoshop, you're familiar with all the shortcuts, you can kind of work around this. Well, if you're familiar with all the shortcuts, you can actually do a lot in professional mode. Although without seeing your layers palette, you are a bit lost. So then next you have this mode, and then finally back to the standard mode. So those are your various modes. I think this is my preferred mode. We've got this mode, and then back to normal. Okay, so those are your viewing modes. And then when it comes to shortcuts, I already mentioned a few down here, but also realize that each of these tools have their own shortcut. And if I hover over them, you can see there next to the name of the tool is that M. That is the shortcut for this tool. So move tool is V. The marquee selection tool is M for marquee. L is for lasso. And then W is the quick selection tools. C for crop. K for the frame. I for the eyedropper. J for the healing tools. B for the brush tools. S for the stamp tools, Y for the history brush, E for the eraser, G for gradient, and then these here don't have shortcuts. And then these are O for these shortcuts. Now you'll notice that these have multiple tools that all have the same shortcut. So what do we do with those? If I hit O, nothing changes. Well, if I hit Shift O, you'll see that the tool is changing. Now, personally, I like to just hit the keyboard once. I don't want to hold Shift to change the tool. So Photoshop allows you to change that behavior. If you go to Preferences, General, and then go down to Tools, turn off this Use Shift key for tool switch. I'm going to turn that off, hit OK, and now as I hit 0, you can see, or sorry, hit O, you can see my tool is changing. All right, for the pen tool, the shortcut is P. For the type tool, the shortcut is T. For the path selection tool, the shortcut is A. For the shape tool, the selection is U. And then for the hand is H. And then for the zoom tool is Z. Now, the zoom tool and the hand tool are things that you basically need to navigate around your image. So no matter what other tool you're on, there are shortcuts that will always work for these two. So the first one is the hand tool, and that's just clicking on the space bar. So unless you're on the type tool, the space bar will bring up your hand. So let's zoom in a little here. If I hit the space bar, no matter what tool I'm on, I get the hand. Okay? So that's the space bar. And then for zoom, I'm going to do Command and, the space bar, then Command. So space bar and Command together gives me zoom. Space bar by itself gives me the hand. Now, because the shortcut on a Mac for Spotlight is Command spacebar, what you want to do is push down the spacebar first, then Command to get zoom. So just in terms of sequence, instead of doing Command spacebar, do spacebar Command. And that'll bring up zoom, and then just the spacebar is hand. So those are your basic navigational shortcuts, and then all your individual tool shortcuts. As we mentioned here, the shortcut for defaulting your colors is D. The shortcut for switching your colors is X. And then the shortcut for quick mask is Q. And the shortcut for viewing modes is F. So that's the toolbar. Before we finish this lesson, I want to go into here and make a few changes to our toolbar. So I'm going to go to Edit Toolbar. That's going to bring up this customized toolbar, which you can also access under Edit Toolbar here. Okay, so basically this allows you to move certain tools into a little bin that is hidden outside of Photoshop so that your tools are not cluttered with tools that you never actually use. And the ones that we're going to be moving over are Artboard tool. So we're going to move that to here. Now you might be wondering, well, what's the value of moving these out, especially if I already have shortcuts for these tools and there's, what's the harm in having them? Well, for me, it's this little thing here called Disable Shortcuts for Hidden Toolbars. I'm going to turn this on. Now, when I hit V, I know that I'm going to get the Move tool. I will never get the Artboard tool. So that's important for me personally, the way I work in Photoshop. I do everything with shortcuts. So anytime there can be a shortcut confusion, I want to eliminate it if I can. And in this case, I can, so I'm going to. Okay, so we're going to move this because we never used that. And we're going to move these polygonal and magnetic lasso tools. I'll leave those. I'm going to get rid of the perspective crop, the slice tool. and the slice select. We're not going to be using the frame tool, so I'm going to get rid of that for now. And I'm not going to be using the eyedropper either. So let's go ahead and move all those out. I never use this content aware move tool, so we're going to move that out. Same with the red eye. I don't use the pencil tool, so I'm going to get rid of that. Same with the color replacement. I don't use the pattern stamp, so I'm going to get rid of that. These art history brushes have very specific use cases. I'm not going to use those right now, so let's move all those out. And I just want my normal eraser. And I want G to be the only shortcut for gradient. So I'm going to get rid of these two. And leave those, leave those. I don't need these other pen tools, so I'm going to get rid of those as well. And then for the type tool, I just want my horizontal type tool. So I'm going to leave that, get rid of the others. And that looks good. Let's hit done. And again, make sure you have disable shortcuts for hidden toolbar extras. Hit done. So there you go. We now have our toolbar how we want it. And that's kind of a 101 on the tools in Photoshop.
So there you have it. That's the introduction to Photoshop. And hopefully in the course of this, you learned something that you didn't know before. And if you did enjoy this and want to check out the full new course when it comes out, put your email in the waiting list below and you'll be the first to find out. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.